Hello, my little freaky bats. I'm back with another creepypasta story, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, but I keep forgetting. So I keep wanting to do like when a holiday comes up, I wanted to do one based on a holiday. St. Patrick's Day was the last holiday besides today, which is Cesar Chavez, but there's no creepypastas about that. So I wanted to look for a St. Patrick's creepypasta on the creepypasta website, but there wasn't any. And my friend had told me that I should have done Clockwork, and I thought I did do Clockwork Story, but I suppose not. So today I'm doing Clockwork. Your time is up. So I don't think this is the origin story. If it is, well then it's a Clockwork origin story. If not, well then it's just the creepypasta story then. So enjoy. A little girl sat in her room. Her messy brown hair was pulled into pigtails. Her hazel eyes stared at the door. She hugged her stuffed giraffe close to her little body and listened closely to the loud yells of her father and mother. "I never should have had any damn kids," screamed a loud, deep voice. All they do all they do is make messes, complain, and draw on the walls. He was cut off by the high, angered yells by the girl's mother. "They're children, David. They don't know any better. Fuck me, Mary Beth. I don't want to hear your bullshit excuse. I've had just about enough of them." "And what do you plan on doing about it?" The girl heard footsteps coming towards her room. She hugged her giraffe closer. The door was violently open, and there in the hallway stood her large, angry, overweight father. In one of his meaty hands, he held a large textbook. "Stop it, David!" screamed her mother, but the father avoided his wife's pleading and cries. He grabbed the little girl by the collar, and she screamed and kicked, trembling and shaking with fear. The girl's father harshly held up the textbook. "This is for drawing on my fucking walls, you little bitch." Years later, the little girl known as Natalie is 17 years old. Like usual, she stayed in her room watching TV. Her dad was ranting on and on about some economic crap that she really couldn't care less about. While she munched on some popcorn, she was also currently drawing a picture. It was a little bit of gore in it, but she liked drawing blood. It gave her some weird satisfaction. Other than that, multitasking was no problem for her. It became apparent to her at a young age after having to do with so much hard work and labor. She was able to do everything at once. Drawing ended up being her talent and passion. It was her way of escaping from reality. "We're here." She looked up at a large sign in the school at the that read Walker Will Institute for the Creative Fine Arts. She sighed tiredly and stepped out, putting her backpack on her shoulders. "See ya," she said, closing the car door. She walked into the school and chatted with a couple of friends until she went up to her locker on the third floor. She grabbed her books, and before the 5 minute of time was over, she ran to class. Her English teacher annoyingly out her hand on Natalie's desk. This is weird wording, I'm sorry. "Where's your assignment, Miss Olette?" Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I only know Spanish, a little bit of French, and English. I don't know what this language is. Natalie swallowed. I forgot it at home." The teacher growled and stood. "Your time is up, Miss Olette. Don't disappoint me." Natalie seemed puzzled by the thought for a moment. She didn't know why, but those words seemed to melt through her. She simply ignored it and went back to listening to the lesson, falling asleep not too long after, of course. Later that day, she was heading to her locker for fourth period, and suddenly her boyfriend Chris came up to her. Hey, talk to me after school, okay? She smiled lovingly at Chris, though strangely she didn't expect anything. He was always a sweet guy. During her French class, she dared not to pay attention. Instead, she doodled a thing she loved to draw: blood, gore, people being stabbed, and knives. Other people say that that's pretty dark of her to draw such things, but she saw nothing wrong with it. For a strange reason, it was almost normal to her. Miss Olette, she quickly covered her drawings on her paper and looked up at her French teacher. Yes? He gestured her to move her arm with a slight turn of his head. Show me your work. She hesitantly moved her arm to show the picture of someone being stabbed. The teacher stared, puzzled, looking at her a bit. She smiled nervously. Erase that and get started on your work, he said in a calm tone. He walked away as she sighed and erased the picture. Miss Olette, she looked up at him. Your time is almost up on getting your work done. I suggest doing it now. She growled at the remark. Time always seemed to be against her. As far as she cared, time can go fuck itself. After class, she walked out of the school to find her boyfriend standing near the fence by the sidewalk. She smiled and walked over, hoping her day can at least cheer up by him, but as she walked over, her smile faded. He wasn't smiling back. Chris, what's wrong? What did you want to talk about? Natalie, I think we it's time that we see other people. She felt her heart break. But why? He gave her a stern look. It's your mindset. Your drawings, they creep me out. I think it's something wrong with you. And the saddest part is, why haven't you told me? Why are you acting like this? It makes me feel irresponsible. So I just can't do it anymore. I'm sorry. And with that, he began to walk away. Natalie slammed her hands on the bathroom counter at home. She stared at herself in the mirror, her eyes twitching. I won't hurt myself like the others. I can stay strong. There was a needle and black thread in her hand. It's pointless. It doesn't help. Some weird sensation pulled at her subconscious. She chuckled lightly. No, I'm doing it because I want to. She held up the needle and thread. At the end of it, she smirked wildly. Time is up. Piece by piece, cut after cut, even though excruciating pain was going through her, she did not whine. She did not whimper. She did not cry. There were no more tears to shed. All she did was smile. The blood from the piercing made a low dripping noise from the sink and into the counter. When she was finished, she stood back and admired her handiwork. She stroked the horrendous stitches on the side of her mouth and spread into a wide smile. She felt the warm, wet blood on her fingers and licked it, gently consuming the metallic taste of liquid in pure ecstasy. Ecstasy. I'm sorry. She stopped when she saw her mother's reflection in the mirror behind her. Behind her mother's wide eyes and pale face, she suddenly felt the pain and cried, Mom! She had never felt so confused. What just happened to her? Her mother has scheduled some therapy for her. Natalie had gotten rid of the stitches and figured how much pain it would bring, so she went to the therapist. She made sure her hood was up, not to let anyone see. She sat on the comfortable leather seat and stared at the blonde-haired woman across from her in silence. Your name is Natalie, isn't it? Natalie just nodded. I'm Deborah. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help. Now, tell me, what's been some of your problems? Natalie stared. Time. Time has been my problem. Deborah have her a confused look. Deborah had a confused look. What about time? Natalie's hand roughly gripped the leather of the seat. Everything. It makes you live through it, slowly processing through life, being controlled by society, only to be tortured. It's a vicious cycle. Time does not end. It does not slow down. It does not speed up. It's violent. You live through the torture over and over again, unable to feel, unable to fast forward from it. Natalie had really no idea what she said. She felt she wasn't herself anymore. Could this be because of all the things she kept contained? No, it was impossible. But for some strange reason, she liked it. The therapist leaned closer. Sweetheart, I want you to tell me what happened to you. Natalie still stared. There was a long pause. She smirked slightly and her piercings from the stitches slightly opened again. Why don't you tell me, Blondie? You're the expert. Deborah seemed to have looked annoyed. I can't help you until you tell me what's wrong, Natalie. Her fingers stared to tears into the started to tear into the leather seats. Natalie isn't here anymore. With that, Deborah's eyes widened. She got up. I'll be right back. Please sit here. She walked out, leaving her alone. Natalie did not move. She sat perfectly still, a natural while of waiting and impatience. Her parents finally walked in. She stood up, happy to go, but she noticed her parents' expression. Even her father had a strange, saddened look on his face. Her confusion grew, but she said no words and followed them to the car. On their way there, she thought that she was going back home, so she started to drift off. Strangely, she heard a dark voice speaking in her dreams. It almost sounded like herself, echoing into eternal darkness. Your time is up. She shot awake. Beads of sweat were rolling down her face. She wasn't home. She wasn't in the car. She was in a bed. A white bed in a white room. She looked to her side, seeing that she was hooked to a heart monitor. She went to get up, but suddenly realized she was bound down. She panicked. She tried to struggle, but paused. Here a door to her left open. A man on a white shirt looked at her, his hands behind his back. You must be very confused right now. I can imagine, but I'm letting you know. We're only here to help you. Your parents agreed to sign a contract to give you some medical drugs to hopefully help your state of mind. She opened her mouth to protest, but was quickly silenced. You'll be back to normal in no time. Just try to relax. He walked over. She tried to move but couldn't, due to the bounds around her wrists and legs. He carefully took a mask and put it over her mouth and nose. She tried to shake it off, but felt herself starting to slip under the drugs and her eyes slowly shut. Suddenly, she woke up. She couldn't comprehend what the hell she was seeing. She was being given multiple injections. Even some things were rubbed on her skin. She felt woozy, but very aware of her surroundings. Her heart rate was starting to speed up on the monitor, and the doctors took notice of this. They looked at her, seeing her opened eyes. One of the doctors was yelling at her and at another. She couldn't understand what they were talking about, but she suddenly felt a rush of adrenaline slowly starting to slip through her bonds, shake, shaking violently. One of the doctors were going One of the doctors were going to hold her down, but was suddenly hesitant of doing so. All three doctors backed away. She stayed on the edge. She stayed on the edge of the bed now, her mat, and ripped the mask and tube from her arm. She got up, started to stumble. Her breathing hitched. Her vision was blurry. She couldn't make herself out, and suddenly she felt a surge of pain in the chest. She gripped her chest where her heart should be and fell to her knees and coughed up blood, then fell to the floor completely blacking out. She woke up slowly. She was back in bed and the doctors were sitting beside her. Something went horribly wrong. She didn't know why, but she felt hatred towards the doctor. He took notice of it and looked away. You weren't supposed to wake up while we were giving you the doses. We weren't sure how it affected you, but we have a feeling that we're going to find out. He paused for a second before taking out a small mirror, not looking at her. It happened to have effect on her appearance as well. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes widened. They were completely green. She noticed that she still had the stitches in her mouth. For some reason, she couldn't help but feel happy. Her heart rate started to increase again. She gave out a low chuckle. The doctor looked in shock, seeing that she was already standing over him. Doctor? She said, still chuckling. He trembled slightly, pressing a button under the monitor. Yes, your time is up. A loud scream was heard from the halls of the hospital. Two security guards rushed into the room, kicking open the door. Blood was the first thing that they saw. Blood on the walls, bed, floor, and even on the ceiling. Natalie had taken the doctor and strapped him down to the bed. His spine was completely snapped as the bed was bent, almost into a sandwich. Blood poured from his nose, mouth, and even the corner was the and in the corner was the murderer, happily drawing gruesome pictures on the walls in blood, followed by the phrase, "Your time is up." She slowly turned to look at them. A wide-eyed, crazy grin spread across her face. "Hello, friends. Would you like to play?" The police quickly pulled out weapons. When she charged at one of them, quickly able to dodge a strike, she grabbed the pocket knife and slashed it across the waistline. Blood and organs flowed out, and the police collapsed on the ground. The other shook his head with fear, dropping his weapon. She slowly walked up to him and placed the tip of the knife in his chest. "Your time is up." She slowly slid the knife down all the way into his gut. The organ spilled, pulled out into the floor, and he collapsed. Natalie's mother was sleeping silently next to her husband. She woke to the sound of someone knocking on her door. She got up and walked out of the bedroom to go open the door. It was pouring outside. She walked up to the door and paused. When she was about to grab the knob, there was a faint sound of laughter. The rain and thunder seemed to be quieter. She pressed her ears against the door. "Hello, Mother." Natalie burst through the door, two knives in hand. Her mother stumbled back, hitting her head against the coat rack. One of the knobs broke into her skull, and it bled violently from the back of her head into the floor. She fell to the ground, paralyzed but still conscious. Natalie towered over her and slowly knelt down to keep the level of her eyes, to show her two knives covered in thick red blood. "I was suffering, Mother." She ran the tip of the knife across her cheek, cutting it slightly. Natalie tilted her head. You were weak. You did nothing. All her mother could do was shake and grasp constantly like a fish on the line. Natalie gripped her mother and gently set her down. She proceeded to stand on top of her, started to make a V cut into her chest. Her mother only gasped and shook. Natalie knew that she didn't have much time left. She proceeded to forcefully open her mother's chest cavity with a loud crack. Natalie reaches inside, grabs her mother's heart as it beats slowly in her hand. Its pulses were growing dimmer and dimmer. Suddenly, she ripped it out, blood spreading all over her face. She stared at her mother directly in the eye as she slowly died. Sweet dreams, she said. Her mother collapsed. She said to her mother's corpse, your time was up. She put her heart in her mother's mouth, patting her cheek softly, and stood up. She wasn't done yet. Natalie's father had awoken and realized his wife had not returned. His eyes started to adjust to the darkness of the room and suddenly realized Natalie standing on his side of the bed, smirking crazily with her green eyes glowing in the darkness. Blood was all over her face, and the scent was unbearable. She put on a fake sad face. Oh dear, Mother's gone. I wonder who will get the money. She said. She suddenly grabbed her father's forehead. That's all you ever cared about, isn't it? That's all you ever cared about. Her father, however, was a fighter, so he sprung up, grabbed her by the neck, and threw her to the ground. He started to stomp on her chest until she coughed blood. Doesn't it feel good, Daddy? She said, coughed up more blood. After all, you ever seemed to mind doing it all those years ago. Did you? He narrowed his eyes. You aren't my daughter. A wide smirk spread across her face, and she looked at him with her glowing eyes as blood dripped down her mouth. You're right. I'm not. She suddenly ripped him, causing him to tripped him, causing him to fall hard on the floor. She got up, both knives in hand. They say the bigger you are, the harder you fall. She grabbed a pillow and stuffed it in his face. She started to stomp on it harder and harder, hearing a loud crack noise after a while. Then she pulled the pillow away. His face was gruesomely mutilated. He was whimpering, crying in pain. What's the matter, Daddy? Too much pain for you? She stabbed both knives into his stomach, leaving them there for now, as she ripped one out of his large, heavy wooden poles from the bed. She set it down, putting it all the weight on her body into the pole. The pole started to squeeze his insides up into his body. He started to gag and blood poured from his mouth. His breath was silent. She forced herself to pull back. No more weight. Pull back on more weight, and suddenly his organs burst out of his body. A nasty gore piled onto the floor and the sides of his face. Your time was up. Finally. This would be her favorite part. She quietly snuck down her brother's room, silently opened the door, and blood dripping from her mouth. Her brother wasn't in bed. It was apparent that he must have been hiding somewhere. Oh, dear brother, she said, starting to walk inside. All I wanted to do was have a little fun. As she stepped in more, she listened closely for any sounds, any breathing. She even sniffed the air for his putrid scent. The closer she listened, she finally noticed something. A faint breathing noise. Shit, I don't know how to do that. She fell on the floor, trembling. Her brother was behind her with a bloody baseball bat. He was glaring down with anger, panting in rage. She tried to get up slowly, but he hit her again. Mother always did like you the best. He hit her hard one last time before taking a breather. She was bleeding. Her green eyes drooped, glowing faintly in the darkness. She felt weak and looked closer up to the ceiling. She recalled the days that she had spent in here, being tortured, having to go with it for four years. She felt a sudden rush of energy to her body. She started laughing insanely. Her mother, her brother went to hit her again, but she used both her knives to block it. You're going to hell, brother. With a large push, she sent her brother flying over the bed, and he hit his head against the wall. He growled angrily. She stabbed the two knives in his arm, keeping him pinned to the wall. He screamed, struggling. Let's see what we could use here. She started walking around the room and smirked, seeing a butter knife in his bedside. She picked it up and walked over to him. They say that the eyes are the softest organs in the body. She licked the knife. He looked with horror as she started to dig out his eyes. He shrieked loudly and quickly tied a cloth around his mouth. Now, can't have you waking the neighbors. He wasn't able to see anything, and the pain was unbearable. Blood leaked violently from his eye sockets. He would cry, but was now incapable. She picked up a pair of scissors and walked over to him. I think you need to cut loose, brother. She stabbed the scissors into his guts, and he cried out. She treated him like an arts and crafts, cutting through the skin like paper. She lifted up his large intestines. You know what I love? Macaroon art. She started to cut intestines into sections. These might be a little bit too big to fit on a plate, though. She went down to his toes and started cracking them off, one by one. Next, she snapped his fingers as he was choking on his own blood now. She pulled the cloth down and the blood poured from his mouth. There, brother. Maybe this will make you feel better. She stuffed her fingers in his mouth and jammed into his throat. He choked and died. That's a crappy way to die. Your time was up. The girl known as Natalie walked into her room. In the corner, she saw her stuffed giraffe. She stared at it and, without a word, walked into the bathroom, looked at herself, and heard a ticking noise. She looked down and saw a pocket watch. She stared at it. She took out one of her knives and grabbed the pocket watch and disassembled the watch until only the small clock was left. Time makes you live through torture, she said slowly, and started to slowly dig it into her eye. As the vision of her left eye grew blurry and red, the eye fell into the sink as she tore it. There was a squishing sound until it felt like the clock perfectly fit in her eye. I am Clockwork. The young girl, used to be known as Natalie, walked away from her burning house. Inside, the giraffe slowly burned along with the corpse of her family. Their time was up.